It was just past midnight on a crisp October evening in the outskirts of Atlanta. The kind of night where the chill seeps through your coat and the streets are empty except for the occasional flicker of headlights. Darius Walker was driving home from a late shift at a warehouse. A steady, hardworking young man with no criminal record, no enemies, just a dream to build a better life for himself and his family. But fate had other plans. Out of nowhere, a police cruiser's flashing lights cut through the darkness behind him. Darius pulled over, confused but compliant. The officer approached with a stern face, and that's when everything began to unravel. According to the officer's report, he had pulled Darius over because he smelled marijuana and noticed a suspicious bulge in the car's passenger seat. The officer claimed these were grounds for a search. What happened next, though, was far from routine. Within minutes, Darius was handcuffed and arrested on drug possession charges. The officer alleged he found a small bag of what was supposedly marijuana, but the story told by multiple witnesses painted a very different picture. At a nearby gas station, a night clerk recalled hearing a commotion outside. "I saw the officer shove him against the car hard," the clerk said. Darius didn't resist, but the cop kept yelling and pushing him. It looked like he was roughing him up for no reason. Another bystander, walking his dog, described the scene as disturbing, saying that after the arrest, Darius appeared disoriented and was breathing heavily, but officers ignored his pleas for help. Despite these accounts, when the case moved to court, the narrative was tightly controlled. The local police department vouched for their officers' conduct, and the prosecution portrayed Darius as a typical drug dealer caught red-handed. No mention was made of the witnesses or their conflicting stories. This was just the beginning of a troubling pattern. The prosecutor assigned to Darius's case, a man named Robert Jenkins, had well-known ties to the police department and a reputation for securing convictions at any cost. Defense attorneys in the area whispered about his tactics, intimidating witnesses, withholding evidence, and pushing plea deals so harsh that defendants often felt they had no choice but to accept. Darius's court-appointed lawyer, fresh out of law school and drowning in a backlog of cases, struggled to mount a proper defense. The legal system, stacked against him, seemed designed to crush rather than protect. More troubling was the composition of the jury. Despite Atlanta's diverse population, the jury was overwhelmingly white and lacked any members from communities familiar with systemic bias or police misconduct. The jury's limited perspective would prove crucial. During the trial, key evidence that could have exonerated Darius mysteriously disappeared. Surveillance footage from a nearby store, which might have shown the supposed bulge, was actually a lunch bag, was lost. Witnesses who contradicted the officer's testimony were discredited or never called. In the end, the jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict. Darius was sentenced to 15 years in prison, a harsh punishment for a first-time, non-violent offense, especially one so mired in doubt. The verdict shocked many in the community. Protests erupted outside the courthouse, and human rights groups condemned the trial as a miscarriage of justice. But inside the walls of prison, Darius faced an even darker reality. Denied adequate medical care, isolated from family, and subjected to harsh conditions, his health began to deteriorate. His spirit, once full of hope, was slowly crushed by a system that had turned its back on him. This was not just one man's tragedy. It was a glaring example of how deeply racism and corruption can infiltrate the criminal justice system, how privilege protects some, while others pay the ultimate price. A breakthrough came months later when Maya Reynolds, an investigative journalist known for exposing injustices, began digging into Darius's case. Maya was driven by more than professional curiosity. She had grown up in a neighborhood similar to Darius's and had seen firsthand how systemic bias shattered lives. She vowed to uncover the truth no matter the cost. Her investigation revealed a disturbing pattern: altered police reports, intimidated witnesses, suppressed forensic tests, and a prosecution unwilling to disclose exculpatory evidence. It wasn't just incompetence, it was a deliberate effort to ensure Darius's conviction. Maya's work sparked outrage and demands for a retrial, but the establishment fought back, labeling her a troublemaker attempting to discredit her findings and even threatening her safety. As the pressure mounted, the question remained: would justice for Darius Walker ever truly be possible? Or would he remain a victim of a system designed to protect itself at all costs? The months following Darius Walker's conviction were marked by silence in the courtroom but thunderous unrest outside its walls. Behind the cold bars of the prison, Darius became a symbol, whether one of guilt or victimhood depended entirely on who you asked. But in the alleys, on street corners, and in the dimly lit rooms of the local newspaper, his name began to resonate as the face of a grave miscarriage of justice. Maya Reynolds, an investigative journalist with a reputation for tenacity and an unyielding sense of justice, picked up Darius's story where the court left off. For Maya, this wasn't just another headline. It was a call to expose a system built to protect the powerful at the expense of the marginalized. Her investigation quickly revealed that Darius's case was just the tip of an iceberg. Police records in the city suggested a pattern. Minority suspects disproportionately targeted, evidence mysteriously discovered after arrests, and witnesses coached or intimidated into fabricating accounts that fit the prosecution's narrative. This systemic pattern of racial profiling and corruption was not new, but Maya's painstaking research began to document it with alarming clarity. The breakthrough came when Maya received an encrypted email from an anonymous source within the police department. The sender, a low-ranking officer with a conscience burdened by guilt, handed over a cache of internal emails and memos that exposed the dark underbelly of Darius's arrest and trial. Among the documents was a damning internal report contradicting official statements. It detailed how officers had planted drugs in Darius's vehicle after impounding it, evidence that was the cornerstone of his conviction. There was also a chilling email chain showing the lead detective instructing a key witness to change their testimony to align with the fabricated narrative. Maya published the first of her exposés, shaking the city to its core. Her articles laid bare the stark reality. Darius was not just a victim of a single corrupt act, but a victim of an entire system designed to silence and incarcerate black men. Public outrage followed swiftly. Crowds gathered at city halls and outside police stations, chanting Darius's name and demanding accountability. Legal advocacy groups began to rally, filing motions to reopen the case and pushing for a thorough investigation into police misconduct. Yet, as the groundswell of support grew, so did the resistance from the establishment. Robert Jenkins, the ambitious prosecutor who had pushed hardest for Darius's conviction, launched a counter-campaign. Using his connections in local media and politics, Jenkins portrayed Maya as a radical agitator, a journalist more interested in stirring public unrest than pursuing truth. His narrative framed Darius as a dangerous criminal and dismissed the new evidence as conspiracy theories. The media war was brutal. Some mainstream outlets parroted Jenkins's rhetoric, painting Maya as reckless and irresponsible, while others questioned the credibility of the anonymous police whistleblower. The city became a battleground of competing truths, with race, class, and power dynamics playing out in every headline. Meanwhile, the Walker family endured their own agony. Gloria Walker, Darius's mother, emerged as a reluctant but fierce activist. A woman who had never seen herself as political, Gloria transformed grief into determination, speaking at rallies and lobbying local officials. Her speeches were raw, honest, and deeply moving. "My son is not a statistic. He's a human being with dreams, hopes, and a future stolen from him by a broken system," she told a packed crowd during one candlelight vigil. Despite the swelling public support and mounting evidence, the judicial system remained frustratingly immobile. Multiple appeals filed by Darius's lawyers were dismissed. Judges, some with troubling political ties, ruled that the new evidence was insufficient to overturn the verdict. Inside the prison, Darius's health deteriorated. Neglected injuries from his arrest left him in chronic pain. He battled depression and isolation, often writing letters to Maya and his family filled with a haunting mixture of despair and resolve. In one of his letters, Darius wrote, "Every day I feel like the walls close and tighter. They want to break me, to erase me, but I am still here, still fighting. Not just for me, but for every person who's ever been silenced by injustice. Then came a startling twist. A janitor working late one night at the courthouse stumbled upon a discarded manila envelope in the trash. Inside was a recording, a secretly made audio tape from the trial. The tape captured a private conversation between the lead detective and a key prosecution witness, where the detective coached the witness on what to say under oath. This smoking gun evidence had been mysteriously omitted from the official trial record. The discovery reignited calls for justice. Legal teams filed emergency motions for a new trial, arguing that this evidence proved the original verdict was fundamentally flawed. The courtroom was once again filled with tension, media cameras rolling as the city braced for what might become a landmark moment in the fight against judicial corruption. Yet, the battle was far from over. Powerful interests in the city, including some police officials and politicians, worked behind the scenes to suppress the evidence. Legal technicalities were employed to delay the hearings, and shadow campaigns aimed at discrediting the whistleblower and witnesses surfaced. The city was deeply divided. Many feared that reopening the case would cast doubt on the entire justice system and lead to chaos. Others argued passionately that true justice demanded a reckoning, no matter how uncomfortable. For Darius and his family, this was more than a legal battle. It was a fight to reclaim dignity and humanity in a system that had stripped it away. Their story illuminated painful truths about race, privilege, and power in modern America. As the fight for a new trial intensified, the world watched. Would justice finally prevail? Or would the forces of corruption ensure that Darius Walker's name was just another footnote in the long history of systemic injustice? The reopening of Darius Walker's case quickly became the most high-profile legal battle in the city's recent history. Courtrooms that had once been silent to his pleas were now flooded with media, lawyers, activists, and ordinary citizens who saw in Darius's struggle the very essence of a broken justice system desperately needing repair. Inside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Robert Jenkins, the prosecutor who had built his career on securing Darius's conviction, now faced overwhelming pressure. The damning audio tape, the whistleblower's documents, and the public outcry all forced him into a defensive posture. Jenkins was no stranger to courtroom theatrics, but this time, the stakes were different. The evidence was not just circumstantial, it was direct, exposing deliberate manipulation and fabrication. As the new trial began, Maya Reynolds sat in the press gallery, notebook in hand, chronicling every moment. She knew the story was about more than just Darius. It was about exposing systemic racism and corruption that threatened the very foundation of justice. The prosecution's case began to unravel almost immediately. Defense attorneys systematically dismantled the credibility of key witnesses, revealing their coached testimonies and ties to law enforcement. The audio recording played in court sent shockwaves through the packed room. The detective's voice, cold and calculated, instructing witnesses to stick to the script and emphasizing the need to make the story airtight. Outside the courtroom, protests erupted in support of Darius, while factions loyal to the establishment condemned the proceedings as a threat to law and order. The city seemed to teeter on the edge of chaos, divided by racial and political lines that the case had laid bare. In the weeks that followed, explosive testimonies surfaced. A former police officer turned whistleblower testified about widespread racial profiling and evidence tampering within the department. Another witness described the culture of intimidation aimed at minority suspects to coerce confessions. But it wasn't just the courtroom drama that gripped the public. The personal stories of those involved humanized the fight for justice. Gloria Walker, Darius's mother, took the stand. Her voice, steady but laced with heartbreak, recounted the impact of the conviction on her family. "They took my son's future. They took my peace. But I refused to let his story be silenced." The defense's closing argument was a powerful indictment not just of the individual officers and officials involved, but of the entire system that allowed such injustices to thrive. They urged the jury to consider the broader context: the history of racial discrimination, the unchecked power of the police, and the devastating human cost of a corrupt justice system. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict that shocked many but delighted others. Darius Walker was exonerated. The courtroom erupted in tears and cheers. For the Walker family, it was a moment of vindication, but also a bittersweet victory. Years of Darius's life had been lost behind bars, his name stained by a false conviction. Yet the story did not end with the verdict. Investigations into the police department and the prosecutor's office intensified. Several officers were suspended or charged with misconduct. Calls for widespread reforms became impossible to ignore. However, the battle for justice revealed uncomfortable truths about how deeply entrenched bias and corruption were, and the resistance to change remained fierce. Robert Jenkins avoided prosecution, maintaining his innocence and continuing his political career with a platform rooted in law and order. Darius Walker's release sparked debates across the country. Was this case an outlier or a reflection of systemic failures? Was justice truly possible in a system built on privilege and prejudice? In the years that followed, Darius became an advocate for criminal justice reform, using his story to expose the harsh realities faced by countless others wrongfully convicted. His message was clear: justice is not just about punishment. It's about truth, fairness, and respect for every human life. Until that happens, no one is truly free. The silent trial had ended, but its echoes reverberated far beyond one man's fate, challenging a nation to confront its darkest flaws.